Hello, Serious Survivor here. And today we're going to look at the isolation/quarantine camps that have been established across the nation. And there are a lot of these. But before we get into it, a quick word from our sponsors. If you're worried about the future, I don't blame you. Millions of Americans are quietly stocking up on emergency food. Should you? Ask yourself, do you currently have enough food on hand to get you through the next month? If not, you should strongly consider getting a 4-week emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. They're the nation's #1 preparedness company, and their mission is your survival. They've served millions of American families, and they'd be honored to serve you too. Right now, you can save $50 off their 4-week emergency food kit, which comes with breakfast, lunch, dinner, drinks, and snacks. This gives you the minimum requirement of 2,000 calories per day, and the special packaging keeps it fresh for up to 25 years in proper storage. You can't go wrong. Head on over to preparewithSeriousSurvivor.com and claim your 4-week emergency food kit at this special price. You'll save $50 per kit if you act now. That's preparewithSeriousSurvivor.com. Quarantine camps, isolation camps, recovery centers. There's a lot of terminology used to talk about these types of isolation facilities, and we're going to look at some actual footage of them here, some actual pictures of them. These do exist. For those that say they don't, they do. You can't really deny that. The real question is, what is the intended purpose behind these? We're going to look at some of the documentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about it as we go. And this is the CDC's webpage, and this shows the different quarantine stations and their jurisdictions. So you can come here and you can get information about your local area. And it's a pretty helpful screen just for the knowledge aspect of it so that we know what we are dealing with. But to get into the actual isolation camps, I'm going to go to the King County, Washington, in Washington State's official website, kingcounty.gov. And on this official website, we get actual pictures and we get to look at the camps that they have. And these are actually called Isolation, Quarantine, and Assessment Recovery Facilities. If you go to this page, and once again, the link will be below, one of the things about this page is it will give you the actual facilities, the location of them. And there are some pictures as we can scroll through here and see the different pictures. Apparently they're handing out puzzles there from what we saw on that one. But they're being stocked by Amazon. Amazon is donating, I think they said 250,000 items to these facilities to help keep them running. So a lot of the basic supplies are being given to them by Amazon. The first facility here is in Kent, Washington. The second, North Seattle, Aurora, and then Issaquah, Washington. These three are up and running right now. They actually have inhabitants, I guess you would say, in them, and they are fully staffed, or as staffed as they can be. Now, if we scroll on down the page a little bit, what we're going to see are some of the other centers that are either opened and were closed, or are open waiting to be staffed and waiting to be, I guess you could say, inhabited by people. And there are, as we can see, 5 of these. The first one here, or this one here, is closed at the current time. The Shoreline Assessment Center Recovery Center. As we scroll across the pictures here, you can sort of, if we look here, you can sort of get an idea of how it's set up internally. And if we scroll across, we'll see they were doing a press interview there, a press conference there, some type of something. And you can see this type of facility as it is. I mean, it's a pretty basic facility, pretty basic setup. And that's one of the quarantine facilities. This was one of the first ones that were open in Washington. It is now closed as they've moved to use these 3 instead. But it still remains in place and will be used once again should the need arise, is what they're saying. Now there's a couple more. Another one, the Harbor View Hall Isolation and Recovery Center, is also closed. No pictures of this one, but it's also closed. It was open in the beginning of the pandemic, but it's now closed, and it's still in place though should it be needed to use. So they have several in just this one area. As we see, the kingcounty.gov area, there are several different facilities like this, and that's a lot of facilities, you know, for any type of surge that we may have seen in the past. This is almost overkill to a degree. Now, this in itself doesn't seem that alarming, And, I guess it shouldn't be. It looks on the surface like something great, something that's going to help people if people needed help. And that's true. But unless you get to digging in it a little further, then you're not going to see the involuntary aspect of these quarantine and isolation camps. And that's what we're going to look at right here. As I dug a little deeper, I went to the Department of Health, as we can see up here, the Department of Health, WashingtonState.gov, emergencies, case investigations and contact tracing, isolation and quarantine for COVID-19. So I'm going to post these links too, and I do recommend people reading these links because it is very important, especially when you start looking at some of the documentation. Now, isolation describes when someone who has the symptoms or has tested positive stays home and away from others, including household members, to avoid spreading their illness. So the page itself goes into a lot like that, describing what quarantines and how long a quarantine should last. Pretty basic information that we've all seen before. But as we start scrolling around through this particular, I'm still on the same site, and by clicking through some of the links, we start to see some different options. Now, once we get to the page, as we can see here, for public health and healthcare providers. So now we're in a section that's designed specifically for those who work in the camps or for your public health officers that work for the state, the city, the county, and like that. And these are the actual forms that they would fill out to have someone quarantined and also to have someone involuntary quarantine. As you can see here, options for initiating quarantine and isolation, options for non-compliance, to extend or release. So let's look at the non-compliance section. If you use the local health officer request for voluntary quarantine initially, which is what it talks about up here. Voluntary quarantine is basically when they ask you to quarantine yourself or to report to one of these camps and you refuse. Then there are measures that they can and will take to ensure that that particular individual or individuals, people, will still be detained in these camps. And if we look at these are all Word documents, and these are the actual documents. To begin with, here's the summons. So let's look at the summons. If we look at the summons, I'm going to open it up. State of Washington County Superior Court summons, and it's blank. All right. And in this, it says, in order to defend against this lawsuit, you must respond to the petition by stating your defense in writing and serve a copy upon the undersigned attorney for the petitioner within 20 days after the service of the summons, excluding the day of service. Or a default judgment may be entered against you without notice. If you serve a notice of appearance on the undersigned attorney, you're entitled to notice before a default judgment may be entered. So this is your basic summons, and it's telling you that if you don't respond to this summons, that they can basically make the decision without you being present. So let's minimize those. All right. Now, if we go on down, then we see one called Detention Ex Parte Petition. Now, ex parte is just basically means no presence. You're not there. So they can make a decision without you actually being there. So if we click on this and download it and look at this document, then this is the petition for ex parte order authorizing involuntary detention for quarantine or isolation. Comes now blank, local health officer for blank, by and through his/her attorney blank, and petitions this court for an order ex parte authorizing involuntary detention for quarantine or isolation. Now, as we go on down, factual allegations, the blank health officer, so that would be the county, the city, whatever health officer, has determined or has reason to believe that the respondents is are suspected to be infected with, exposed to, or contaminated with blank, which could infect or contaminate others if respondents are not detained in quarantine or isolated from others. Respondent's condition or suspected condition poses a serious and imminent risk to the health and safety of others if not detained for isolation and quarantine. Other less restricted alternatives have been considered, including voluntary isolation or quarantine as described in the attached declaration, and cannot provide the measure of public protection necessary given the serious and imminent risk to public health and safety posed by the condition or suspected condition. And the fact that it's suspected condition, there's, for a suspected condition, it's just like it sounds. They just have to say they suspect you have a certain condition. Now, when we think about the rhetoric that we hear on television, on the mainstream media, and even from the current administration, how this rhetoric is really picking up about those who have not taken the jab, then we hear this talk on TV already from government officials talking about how dangerous these people are and how we are part of the problem and how we are a threat to the rest of society because people have not received the jab. So when we add that in, the rhetoric, what we're hearing from the administration, and then look at documentation like this, then it is extremely plausible that these camps will be used to house people who refuse to take a shot. Let's look at some of the other documents, or some of the other right here. Options for non-compliance. If you use the local health officer request for voluntary quarantine initially, then use forms in either of the above sections. So if someone is going to voluntarily go, then the forms up here go, but then there's more that can be done. There's more that can be done. As we see right here, order ex parte when voluntary detention refused. And this is another Word document, so let's open it up and take a quick look at it. And as we can see here, authorizing involuntary detention for quarantine or isolation when voluntary quarantine or isolation is refused. So if they come to my house and for some reason they suspect that I am in some way a danger to society, that I can literally just be carted off by the signatures on this paper right here. I really encourage everyone to read these because knowledge is strength. The more we know, the more we understand, and the better prepared we can be. The court order for voluntary, if you go to the court order here, and this is what's very important here, is the terminology. I'm going to scroll right up here. The local health officer order, the one that we just looked at, is likely to be used when not as confident the individual will comply with the voluntary request for voluntary isolation or quarantine. And that's an important statement because it's saying that this involuntary isolation or quarantine can be opposed simply because the local health officer is not confident that a person or individual will comply with a voluntary request for isolation, or when the local health officer believes the formality of the court order with police enforcement and fine will better ensure compliance, or there is no time or ability to secure a court order. And that's also an important statement because what that tells us here is that this document does not require a court order. It does not require a judge's signature. So that means this can be enforced without an actual trial or court date. Court order. Now, if they want to obtain a court order for involuntary isolation or quarantine, and I encourage you to check out these links, is likely to be used when not confident the individual will comply with either request or local health officer order. So if they believe that you're not going to comply with the local health officer orders, then they will simply take it to court, and they can do this ex parte, as we can see here, ex parte and ex parte. So they can do this without you even being there. Order ex parte for involuntary detention. Local health officer believes that it may be necessary to move a contempt of court proceeding with the threat of incarceration and or greater fine to secure the individual as a supplement to the local health officer order for involuntary isolation or quarantine. Both can be obtained but are not mutually exclusive. And now let's look at the order ex parte for involuntary detention. When we bring this up, order ex parte, which means you don't have to be there, authorizing involuntary detention for quarantine or isolation. This matter became before the court on petition for an ex parte order authorizing involuntary detention for quarantine or isolation filed by blank health officer for whichever county by and through his or her attorney, the district attorney. The court considered the pleadings and file herein and the declaration of blank in support of the petition. Based on the argument of the counsel and evidence presented, the court finds the court has jurisdiction over the person and subject matter in this proceeding. The local health officer considered less restrictive alternatives, including voluntary isolation or quarantine, but those alternatives, given the serious and imminent risk to public health and safety, do not provide sufficient public protection. Imminent risk to public health and safety. Isn't that the same terminology that we're hearing from this administration when they talk about those who have refused the jab? And I know it is, and you know it is too. All right, so these documents, I'm going to put up links to these websites in the description below, and really it's something that everyone should read. Please, share it and make sure that people see this, because this is being put in place. This is in all of the states now. These are in every state. And they've been slowly, quietly building them, but they've still been doing it in the public eye. I mean, these are websites. These are public websites that we looked at here. And this is something that right this moment, no, nothing's going to happen tomorrow. But once things are in place, then we can expect these camps aren't going to go to waste. They're going to be used to house individuals that are considered dangerous to society, basically. And we all know who they're talking about when they talk about that. So I hope the video is informative. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless. And for now, Seer Survivor out.